Hey guys, thank you for joining me this week. Give me a second, let me just get set up. How's everyone doing? Okay, let me see. Yeah, how's everyone doing? How have you guys been? What have you guys been up to? Do let me know, do share with me before I get started on today's topic. Okay, let's see. Wow, what's happened this week? I went down to Kuala Lumpur, KL, our capital city, which is 45 minutes drive away from Bentong, from Kechara Forest Retreat. And I got my new bike, and then I tested my new bike, and I promptly did this to myself. So as I was testing the gears, going up a hill, I couldn't change gears fast enough, so I fell over. So as I was going uphill, the bike just came to a complete stop, and then I just fell over. Good morning, Sukfan. Nice to see you. Thank you for joining us today. For those of you watching, please leave me a comment so that I know who's watching and I can say hi to you guys. Just waiting for a couple more people to join us. Yeah, so do let me know how everyone's doing and how things have gone this week and how your attempts at cultivating generosity in the past week have gone. How have you found it so far? Good morning, Lee Ling Yang and Iman. Good morning, and good morning, Glenn. Hi, guys. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me this morning. So yeah, just waiting for a couple more minutes before I get started. Good morning, Pastor Antoinette. It's been a while since I've seen you. And thank you for all your assistance during the MCO. Good morning, Kirsten. Oh yeah, I hope you guys are having a good Father's Day celebration or having a good Father's Day celebration planned for today. And you had a good session with JP. So, all right, let's get started because it's a bit of a long talk today, so I don't want to, run over too much. Morning, David. So, as usual, before we get started, going to set a motivation and also, to elucidate or to detail, where these teachings came from. All right, so I go for refuge in my Lama, from whom I receive these teachings. I go for refuge in the lineage masters, from whom my Lamas received these teachings. Okay, so hi everyone. Do I need to explain who I am? Introduce myself? My name is Pastor Jinai, and I am based here in Kechara Forest Retreat in Bentong, Malaysia. And every Sunday at 10 a.m. Malaysian time, which is GMT plus 8, I give a Sunday Dharma sharing. So we are now into week 5, and in the past weeks, I've talked about blame, I've talked about humility, I've talked about guilt, and then last week I talked about miserliness, and talked about the disbenefits of miserliness and the advantages and also the results of generosity and so on. So before I get into today's talk, good morning, Alex. Thank you for joining us today. Before I get into today's talk, what I want to say is, obviously for all of us, the best example that we have of generosity that we can see immediately in front of us is our teachers. And in our case, it's our guru, His Eminence Tsem Tulku Rinpoche. So Rinpoche was, as everyone knows, it was absolutely generous to a fault. And Rinpoche's generosity arose from his compassion, and it arose from Rinpoche's wish to always be of benefit to others. And Rinpoche's generosity was not just, blind generosity. It wasn't just generosity for the sake of being generous, but it was generosity to genuinely benefit the other person, and it was always skillful and done in the best way for them. So what are some of the examples of generosity that Rinpoche engaged in or that Rinpoche demonstrated that we ourselves can emulate For example, Rinpoche always gave drinks, always gave snacks to any contractors or any workers that came to Kechara Forest Retreat. Rinpoche would regularly sponsor cooling drinks or sponsor coconut water for all of the people who work outside in the hot sun. Rinpoche would send food to students, especially students who are working very late at night. Rinpoche often, covered people's rental, covered people's phone bills. Rinpoche very famously, Rinpoche carried food in his car, so that whenever Rinpoche saw stray animals, stray dogs, Rinpoche would stop and then feed them, and not just feed them, but also recite mantras and bless them. And apart from just being generous through material means, Rinpoche was also very generous in other ways. For example, Rinpoche was never stingy with praise, and Rinpoche was never stingy with giving people acknowledgement or giving people recognition, and Rinpoche was never stingy with knowledge. And Rinpoche also was never stingy in terms of giving credit. So Rinpoche always gave credit where credit was due. And at the same time, people had to be responsible for their own actions and for their own behavior. So what Rinpoche always said was that if we want credit for all the good things we have done, then we also need to learn how to be responsible for all the non-virtuous and destructive actions we have done. So with Rinpoche, it was always balanced. And when I talk about all of these things, obviously there are many actions and many examples. Good morning, Jacinta. Thank you for joining us today. And Tashi Dele Tsering Padenla, thank you for joining us today. So when I give all of these examples of how Rinpoche was generous, my intention for doing so is to show you that it's possible for us to emulate Rinpoche's example. And that every time something happens in front of us, it's very good for us to think, what would Rinpoche do? So when I say, what would Rinpoche do, some of you might be thinking, well, I never got to spend much time with Rinpoche, and I never got to be around Rinpoche that much, so I wouldn't know what Rinpoche would do. And that's a very, very valid point. But what I want to assure you guys also is that, whatever it is that Rinpoche's students have shared about Rinpoche's personality, Rinpoche's character, for example, on the blog, for example, in the videos, it's all 100% accurate. All right? That's exactly how Rinpoche was. Rinpoche was the same in public and in private. Rinpoche was exactly the same. So there would not be anything wrong, if you will, to think what would Rinpoche do whenever you're faced with a situation, to think what would Rinpoche do, and to use it as your guidance for making decisions. And then some of you may also be thinking, well, I'm not on the same level as Rinpoche, so I can't do the same things as Rinpoche. And you're right. You can't, I can't. None of us are the same level as Rinpoche. But we all have to start somewhere. Right? We have to start somewhere first. We have to begin our practice of cultivating the same qualities as what we see in our teachers. So you might be thinking, well, that's so far away. How is it possible for me to do that now? And the thing is, if you don't start from somewhere, you will never get to that stage, right? So you need to start, you need to take the first steps. And if that level that our lamas show us and demonstrate is not possible, then what is the point of practice? All of us engage in practice, all of us listen to Dharma teachings, and we do our prayers and we do our pujas and our meditations, and we make the time to engage in practice because we want to progress, and we have our teachers there as examples for us, as examples of results for us if we commit and if we put out the teachings and into practice. All right, so I also recognize that sometimes Rinpoche would manifest as though making a decision wasn't easy. All right. Oh, good morning, Suzanne. Thank you for joining us today. And happy Father's Day to all the fathers and potential fathers out there. So, yeah, I also recognize, that sometimes Rinpoche would manifest as though making a decision wasn't easy. And what I mean by that is that for Rinpoche, the decision to actually help and the decision to benefit was automatic, all right? So Rinpoche never had to think twice about benefiting somebody else. But how to benefit the person, Rinpoche would manifest as though that process wasn't easy, all right? So Rinpoche would manifest as though the method of helping somebody wasn't clear. And Rinpoche would think and contemplate on how to do that. And of course, we know that Rinpoche automatically already knew how to help people, right? Rinpoche's enlightened nature Rinpoche's omniscience. Through that, Rinpoche will automatically know how to help somebody else. But Rinpoche manifesting the thought process was to help us, see and help us to understand and help give us an example that we can imitate. So what Rinpoche would do is, sometimes, there'd be a problem in front of us, there'd be a challenge in front of us. So Rinpoche would gather his students around him. And that was always the benefit of committing and being close and taking the time away from our attachments, taking away our personal time, taking away our me time, and then putting it towards committing at the Dharma Center, committing to the teacher. Was that whenever Rinpoche, had these decisions to make, oftentimes which were spontaneous, Rinpoche would call these meetings. So Rinpoche would call a meeting whenever there was a problem or a challenge in front of him, and then Rinpoche would discuss it with us. So we would break down the situation that was in front of us, we would break down the problem that was in front of us, and then we would discuss openly and together. And no opinion was right or wrong, but as we were offering our opinions, Rinpoche would correct us and gently guide us and tell us, well, maybe if you thought about it this way, maybe this would arise, so how would you resolve this problem? So Rinpoche would play devil's advocate, but Rinpoche would also encourage us to think in a certain way and to push us, to train us, to learn how to care, to learn how to think widely, to learn how to think from different angles, so that whenever problems come up and whenever things crop up in front of us, that we know how best to help somebody else, or that we are more trained to help other people. So in spite of all of this, of course, things never work out perfectly. Why? Because of samsara, because of karma, because of the karma of us, because of our karma to be in a situation where we make imperfect decisions, because of the karma of the recipient to not be able to receive the full scope of help that we want to offer. All right, so because of karma, of course, decisions and things were not always done perfectly, right? And Rinpoche also recognized that, right? And sometimes Rinpoche would be generous despite knowing that things wouldn't work out perfectly. Rinpoche would still be generous despite knowing that the person might not be grateful. In fact, sometimes people were annoyed that Rinpoche was trying to help. Rinpoche would still be generous, despite knowing that people would be unhappy. And there have been times, that when Rinpoche helped somebody, good morning, Mahesh, thank you for joining us. Yeah, there have been times when Rinpoche would be generous despite being betrayed afterwards. And despite helping the other person. But the thing is, each time these things happen, Rinpoche would still continue to be generous in spite of being disappointed, over and over again over the course of his life. And so yes, sometimes when we are generous, are we disappointed? Excuse me. Yes, we are. Will people betray us when we are generous? Yes, they will. Will people be unhappy? Will people be annoyed with us? Yes, they will be. But what we need to examine is where all of that comes from. What we need to examine is where that disappointment comes from. And that's actually what I want to talk about today, which is disappointment, and talking about how disappointment manifests in our lives, and talking about how we can deal effectively with disappointment. All right, so what I want us to do before we begin is that I want us to think carefully about a quote, a short teaching that Rinpoche gave. And Rinpoche said, if you think very carefully, everything you have done in this world has brought you some sort of disappointment. I guess the secret is not to be attached and to realize we do what we have to do, but do not rely on the material and worldly results to bring any sort of lasting happiness. Material results in itself bring disappointment. But if material results are used for spiritual endeavours, then perhaps it will have deep meaning and something lasting would arise from it. All right, so I want us to think about that phrase very carefully. And so as Rinpoche says, if you think very carefully, everything you have done in this world has brought you some sort of disappointment. So think about that phrase very carefully. And there's another famous phrase that, that's floating around the internet. I don't know who said it, but the phrase goes, you can't make 100% of the people happy 100% of the time. So already that phrase is priming you and preparing you to be disappointed, right? So think very carefully about all the things in your life that you've gone through, and whether they've brought about any sort of lasting happiness. Think about when you buy a house or when you rent a house, right? Maybe some things about the house aren't exactly perfect or aren't exactly how you thought they would turn out. And a simple example of being disappointed when you buy a rent house is, maybe the electricals, despite your best checking of the house and despite your best efforts to review the state of the house, maybe you realize that the electrical system or the electrical wiring isn't the way that you wanted it. That's a simple example of being disappointed when you buy rent a house. A more complicated one is maybe you move in and then you discover that there are ghosts, or there's hauntings, or paranormal activity, and then you're disappointed because you ended up buying or renting a house that has other unseen beings, other unseen residents there. Think about maybe you're a user of dating apps. So maybe think about when you are on Tinder or you're on Grindr, and you arrange for a meet-up with a person, and those dates haven't gone as what you expected, right? So a simple one would be you turn up at the place, the meet-up place, and then you realize that the person in real life doesn't match the photos that they have been sending you. And they've been sending you photos of them taken 10 years ago when they were skinny, when they were fit and young and healthy and gorgeous and beautiful. And now it's a totally different story, right? So what you saw online didn't match what you see in real life. That's a simple example. A more complicated one of disappointment is, the person turns out to be maybe a stalker, or someone who's got a very unusual personality that you just don't mix with, you can't connect with. Maybe think about times when your kids have disappointed you, right? So maybe sometimes your child does something to disappoint you. And it doesn't mean that when they do that, you love them any less, right? It doesn't mean that you love them any less, but it could be that, you thought that you had taught them better. You thought that you had shown them a better example. And it turns out that maybe the lesson hadn't sunk in as deeply as you had expected or as you had assumed. Hi, Sharon. Happy Father's Day to Yaman. All right, so think about that. Maybe sometimes, if you have children, maybe sometimes your kids have disappointed you, and it doesn't mean that you love them less, but it means that the lessons that you thought you had imprinted on them or that you had impressed upon them didn't sink in as deeply as you had initially expected or assumed. Maybe think about, if you're younger, on the younger side, maybe you bought a gaming console and the gaming console isn't all that it's cracked up to be, right? So maybe despite your best research for buying the best gaming console that you thought was the most suitable for you, it doesn't have the most wide variety of games that you liked. It's not that compatible with your previous system and so on. The example that I thought of for myself when I was coming up with the points for this talk was a theme park. So I remember going to theme parks and thinking certain rides weren't all that cracked up, right? So they didn't entirely meet my expectations. And so you go from one ride and it's exhilarating and it's so much fun, and then you go to another ride and it's like meh, no big deal, right? So as Rinpoche says, think very carefully about all the events in your life and realize that nothing you have done in your life has not brought you some sort of disappointment. Another example that came to me when I was drafting the points for this talk was thinking about revisiting places from your childhood, or revisiting places that you're very fond of. And sometimes when you go to these places, you're surprised, pleasantly surprised, and sometimes you're disappointed. And the reason why I brought this up was because I know some people feel very homesick for certain places, right? And I've had talks with these people before about how to deal with homesickness, and it's always a case of our projected expectations of that place being tainted by our imperfect memories. So for example, for me, I think back to the years that I spent in the UK very, very fondly. And I miss London, I miss the UK, right? And I would really love to go back. But when I analyze and I think about it deeper, do I really miss the place, or do I miss the experiences that I had of the place? And are my memories of that place perfect? Right? So no, my memories of the place aren't perfect, because when I go through pictures and when I go through emails and so on, there are a lot of events that made me very sad or upset me at the time that I've completely forgotten about. The only things I remember about the place are the happy memories. And so my memories of that place are imperfect. And do I miss the place, or do I miss my experiences of it? So first, my memories of the experiences are imperfect. And second, the experiences that I had have moved on. My friends have moved on. They're living different lives now. And, the environment has changed. The environment has developed or undeveloped in certain places. And so my expectation is projected. My expectation is not real. It's an illusion. And so homesickness, me missing places, me revisiting childhood places or places that I'm very fond of, that's an expectation. It's not real. It doesn't really exist, right? And so when I go back there, there's a chance I might be surprised, pleasantly surprised and happy, and there's also a chance that I might be disappointed, right? And I'm sure that there are places that all of you can think of, places that you went to when you were in university 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 20 years ago, maybe for some of us, all right? So when we think about all of these things and all of these examples, then we can think, where does disappointment actually come from, right? Because we have all of these experiences throughout our lives. And so where does disappointment actually come from? Or where does disappointment actually arise from? And, as I am explaining all of these things, I'm guessing that all of you may have realized that the key word here in all of these examples is expectation, right? And so everything around us is set up for us to expect something. When we go into a 5-star hotel, we expect a certain level of service. And when we don't get that level of service, then we're disappointed. Then some of us, who are particularly disappointed, will write into the manager. When we look at our teachers, we expect a certain type of behavior. And when our teachers don't fulfill those expectations, then we're disappointed, we get disheartened, we leave, we have bad thoughts about our teacher, we develop doubts, we start to question, and so on. So we have certain expectations for our teacher's behavior or how our teachers should treat us, right? When we buy a certain product, we expect a certain level of durability. So for example, let's say you buy a new computer, you buy a Mac, for example, and you expect it to be, swift, you expect it to be efficient, you expect it to be durable, you expect it to last long, and so on and so on. Maybe sometimes you get a lemon and it doesn't turn out to be that way, and then you're disappointed, right? So, why do we buy certain things? Think about it. Why do you go for, let's say, an iPhone over a Samsung? Why do you go for a Mac over a PC? Why do you go for this brand of coffee over this brand of coffee? We go over these, we go for certain things, and advertising works on us because advertising teaches us to have certain expectations of things, right? So if you buy this thing, you'll become better. If you buy this thing, you'll become faster. If you buy this thing, you'll become smarter. If you buy this thing, you'll become more beautiful. If you join our gym, you'll become thinner, you'll become healthier, you'll become more attractive, you'll attract the mate that you want, and as a result of attracting the mate that you want, you won't be lonely, and so on and so on and so on and so on, right? Going to the right school will get you the right job. Hanging out with the right people will get you into the right position. Going to the right events will connect you to the right person who will help you to get the promotion that you want, and so on. So advertising works on us, and word of mouth works on us because it leads us to develop expectations, and that's the environment that we're in, right? Our entire world is just filled with advertising, online advertising, offline advertising, training us to have expectations and then setting us up for disappointment over and over again. All right, so that's why Rinpoche always says, that whatever happiness we have, it never seems to last, right? Whatever happiness we have, it always comes and then it goes. And so we're happy and then we're sad, and then we're happy and then we're sad. So first of all, what we need to remember is that life is an illusion. Our existence and what we view around us and all around us is all an illusion. It's not our reality. Okay, and what we view around us is a picture that each of us paints for ourselves. The example that I like to give is, when you have a crush on somebody, right? So when you're talking about painting a picture that doesn't really exist, there is no better example than when you have a crush on someone, because you see somebody from afar, from a distance, and then you start to pick up things and fill in the blanks and then paint a picture of a person who doesn't really exist. So for example, if you see a guy, in my case a guy or a girl or whatever, being kind to their parents or being loving to their parents, then you think, oh, that person is so sweet, when I'm older they'll take care of me. When you see a person, being very good with kids, then you think, oh, he or she will make a very good father or mother. Did they tell you that they were going to be a good father or mother No, it could just so happen that they like children, and they're good with kids and kids like them, but we've inferred something, we've projected something, and we've developed an expectation and filled in the blanks and painted a picture for ourselves of something that's not really there, of something that's not really real, right? So we paint this picture and then we project it. And through this projection, then we project our expectations onto the other person or onto something external, onto something that's beyond us. And then when those expectations and then those projections are not met, then we become unhappy, because we have projected that if our expectation is fulfilled, our projected expectation is fulfilled, then I will be happy. You've pinned your happiness onto the expectation. And then when the expectation is not fulfilled, then you get disappointed, then you are sad, and then you are not happy. All right, so as I'm talking, I'm sure that you guys, will be familiar with how these match up to teachings on the 8 worldly dharmas, which, as His Holiness Kechara Pabongka Rinpoche elucidated, these 8 worldly dharmas are being happy if you acquire, being unhappy if you do not, being happy if comfortable, being unhappy if not, being happy if famous, being unhappy if not, and being unhappy if praised, and being unhappy if criticized. Okay, so you project something, you project an expectation, and then you pin your happiness onto that expectation. And when the expectation is not fulfilled, then you are unhappy. When the expectation is fulfilled, then you are happy. And so you can see now that as we're moving through life, and as we have, these projections these expectations that we keep projecting onto other people, and when we pin our happiness onto these expectations, how our happiness can go up and down, up and down, up and down, as Rinpoche has described, how when we expect things, that we will never find lasting happiness, right? And for some people, the difference in these highs and lows between our happiness and unhappiness is much smaller, because they've actually learned how to manage their expectations, and they've learned how to manage their disappointments. And then for other people, what you find is that the difference between the highs and lows are much greater, much wider. Excuse me. And so, those are the people that we tend to find more volatile, who tend to be more emotionally turbulent. And if you want to use the colloquial term for it, we tend to find them more moody. They have more mood swings from happy to unhappy, happy to unhappy, right? So they're not able to manage their highs and lows, as well as people who have learned to manage their expectations and who have learned to manage their disappointments. So whether the highs and lows are very stark and very extreme, or whether they are very well managed, the point still is that our happiness is never constant, and our happiness is always changing, and it's never stable. And that when we project our expectations onto other people or onto external objects, and we pin our happiness onto that, that is what leads to our happiness being unstable. So some of you might also be thinking, Pastor Jinai, if we don't have expectations, then how are we ever going to improve, because we don't have standards? How can things change and how can things progress if we don't have standards, and aren't standards expectations? So, like what Rinpoche said, I guess the secret is not to be attached, and to realize we do what we have to do, but do not rely on the material and worldly results to bring any sort of lasting happiness. All right, so what it means is that it's not wrong to have standards, but it's not wise for us to become attached to a projected outcome. All right, the key word here is attached. Being attached to a particular result, and therefore becoming disappointed when those expectations and that attachment is not met, is not fulfilled, is not realized. So when we have standards, and when we engage interactions where we're expected to have standards, right? So when you go into a hotel and so on, ask yourself these questions. Ask yourself, are our expectations matched by our effort? Are we putting in the adequate or the appropriate amount of effort in order for our expectations to become fulfilled? Okay, and are all the karmic conditions correct for our expectations to be met? So do we have the karmic conditions around us, both from ourselves and from the other person, from the environment, in order for the expectations we're projecting to be fulfilled? All right, and it's important, I wrote here, it's very important to remember that in samsara, Nothing is inherently good or bad, and nothing is inherently wrong or right. So people are not good and people are not bad. They're not permanently good and they're not permanently bad. And to remember that there are only positive, virtuous actions and negative, non-virtuous actions. That's the flip side. All right. So on the one hand, disappointment and pinning our expectations, projecting our expectations and pinning our happiness onto that is wrong, right? Because it's the result of us projecting our expectation on somebody else and those expectations not being fulfilled. On the other hand, being disappointed and experiencing disappointment can also be good. Why? Because having standards, not being attached to a projected outcome, but having standards, and then experiencing disappointment as a result of that, is an indication that you care. You can't have standards, and you can't change, and you can't progress, and you can't improve if you don't have standards, and if you don't care, right? So, whether or not you care for a selfish reason, and whether or not you care for an altruistic reason is a different topic entirely, all right? But the point is that the basis for your sense of disappointment is care. That there is that energy of care in order for you to be disappointed. But we have to move beyond that care. We have to also combine that care with not being attached to the outcome. So caring without being attached. That's how you can prevent yourself from developing and from falling into disappointment. All right? So caring, having standards, that's one side, right? That's one situation, that's one approach, that's one attitude. The other attitude is not caring at all, and that's the extreme. Someone who absolutely never cares about anything and is a complete sociopath / psychopath about everything, and is therefore never disappointed because they just don't care. They never care, right? So what I want you guys to think about is actually to focus on the energy of care and to focus on redirecting the energy of care towards something that's positive and towards something that's virtuous, and combining the energy of care with not being attached to a projected outcome, not having expectations, right? Because focusing on care is an energy, and so focusing on care just purely as an energy allows us to accomplish what we need to accomplish, allows us to redirect that energy of care towards something that's positive and towards something that's virtuous. Good morning, Tan Wubi and Penny and Rina. Good morning, guys. Thank you so much for joining me today. Penny, as requested last week, prayers were done as per your request with your dedication. I'm so sorry that I never got around to updating you on the comment section of last week's talk, but just wanted to let you know that prayers were done as requested, all right? So this week I'm talking about disappointment. And I've covered, where disappointment arises from and the dangers of pinning our happiness onto a projected outcome, onto a projected expectation, and how disappointment actually is a manifestation of care. But it's much more skillful of us to combine this energy of care with not being attached to a projected outcome so that we can accomplish what it is we need to accomplish, and therefore avoid disappointment as much as possible. All right, so all of us have a choice. We have a choice whether we want to redirect our care and accept that life is going to be full of these emotional ups and downs anyway because of our karma, because of karmic conditions, both from ourselves and from those around us, and because we perhaps didn't put in as much effort to match our expectation. All right, so we have a choice. We can redirect our care towards something that's positive and accept that life is going to be full of ups and downs, or we can continue to grow our attachment to things that will only lead to disappointment. All right, so now that I've talked about all this, the obvious next thing to talk about is, since, Pastor Gina, since we're going through disappointment in life and we are going to continue to go through disappointment in life because we're still practicing how to manage our disappointment. I'm still practicing how to manage my disappointments. So since we're going through this, how are we going to be able to manage our disappointments, right? And so how do we manage disappointments? What tools can we employ? What tools can we engage in order to manage our disappointment? And the first thing we can do is we can think about culpability, and we can think about who is responsible for our disappointment. So, is it the other person who is responsible for us being disappointed? Or are we the ones who are responsible? Is it us who should be responsible for our disappointments and for feeling disappointed? Could things have been done differently? And had things been done differently, would it have changed the outcome? Is the outcome that we're experiencing now 100% fully unacceptable, and therefore we have a right to be disappointed? Or is the outcome that we're having now 100% acceptable? Or is it somewhere in the middle, right? Is it that the outcome is somewhat acceptable, or is it that the outcome is somewhat unacceptable? And so when you think about it and when you meditate on it, this allows you to do is it gives you space and it opens you up to lowering your disappointment. Because if an outcome is somewhat acceptable, then okay, maybe I don't have to be disappointed as much as I feel. Maybe I can be happy about certain things about this result, about this outcome. And so when you think about culpability and you think about responsibility, who's responsible for the fact that I'm feeling disappointed, then you can start to open yourself up to lowering your disappointment, because you can start to consider that I'm responsible. Perhaps I have some culpability in this situation, and maybe this situation and this outcome isn't as unacceptable or isn't as disappointing as I had immediately concluded in the first place. And so once you have identified that, then that allows you to reframe your disappointment. So earlier I talked about care, right? And redirecting your care. And that is a key part in reframing our disappointment and in redirecting it. Because caring without projection of expectation or without attachment is what will help us to accomplish what it is that we need to do without becoming disappointed, right? And so caring and doing your best in order to make something manifest without attachment is you understanding that there are factors beyond your control, that there are factors that you can't influence, that there are factors that you can't manipulate or that you can't determine 100%. Combining the understanding that there is karma beyond our control, that there's karma created from many, many previous lives past that is manifesting now, right? So you can care, but understanding that you have these factors that are beyond your control will help you also to reduce how much disappointment you feel. Because when you understand that this outcome may have been determined by karma from countless previous lives, what is the use of becoming disappointed when you know that that is the outcome that was going to happen anyway, right? So caring but combining it with no projections, with no attachments, will help you to manage your disappointments. And so that's how you can reframe your disappointment and reframe, R-E-F-R-A-M-E, not refrain, but reframe your disappointment in order to reduce it, in order to lower it, in order to manage it. All right, so meditate also on the source of your disappointment. Are you disappointed because you care for the other person? Or are you disappointed because an expectation of yours wasn't fulfilled? Now, as I mentioned earlier, it's possible to care for altruistic reasons, and it's possible to care also for selfish reasons. So meditating on the source of your disappointment, meditating on the reasons why you care and don't care, will help you to identify and therefore redirect how you care in the future, retrain how you care in the future. So for parents, Asian tiger moms, Asian tiger dads, this is a very useful exercise for you, I wouldn't say us because I don't have kids, but I would say you guys. It's a very useful exercise because when your child disappoints you, meditate on the source of your disappointment. Is the reason why you're disappointed, let's say your child didn't do well in A-levels, like I was projected not to do well in my A-levels, right? So let's say your child really didn't do well in their A-levels. Is the source of your disappointment because you're afraid that your child's failure doesn't reflect well on you? Is that the source of your disappointment? Or is the source of your disappointment because now they may not get into the university of their choice? So why is it you're disappointed? Why is it that you care so much whether your child has done well or hasn't done well? And we can extend that meditation onto everything else in our lives. All right. So first, recognize when you meditate on the source of your disappointment. First of all, recognize that every interaction that we have in our lives is going to be tainted by some level of selfishness. There is no interaction in our lives which will be entirely free from selfishness. Why? Because we were beings born out of ignorance. As I mentioned in last week's talk, and I think the week before that, we were beings born out of ignorance, and we are beings who are born with ignorance. And so we are born imperfectly, and we are born already habituated from many countless previous lifetimes into being selfish. So recognize that no interaction that we have with anyone in our lives and with any phenomena in our lives is going to be entirely free from selfishness. And the sooner that we accept that, the sooner we will accept that the decisions that we make will never be perfect. And that will help us to stop blaming ourselves and blaming other people for all of the challenges and all of the difficulties and all of the obstacles that we've had and we've experienced in our lives. When we realize that we are imperfect and we also realize that other beings are imperfect, we will also learn how to reduce our disappointment, because we will learn that whatever it is that we do and whatever it is that somebody else does will always somehow lead to disappointment, because it will always somehow be selfish. And it will also help us to realize that not only do we experience disappointment from other people, but we also cause disappointment to other people, because there are certain things that we do which will disappoint others. As a child, I know that there are things that I've done which have disappointed my parents, right? But understanding that I am an imperfect being and that my parents are imperfect beings, and my parents or my friends or whoever it is that is around me are imperfect beings, are still guided and still governed by karma. Understanding that will allow us to realize that disappointments are an inevitable part of life. And so we are disappointed, but then we can move on. We can move past that disappointment. We don't get hung up and stuck and attached to that feeling of disappointment. All right. Rinpoche, talked about this a few times with me about how, in the past, Rinpoche knows that he has disappointed people. Rinpoche knew that, for example, he disappointed his adoptive parents when he left New Jersey to pursue spirituality. Rinpoche knew that he had done that, and so that's one of the reasons why Rinpoche called up his adoptive mother to apologize to her. But Rinpoche told me, that he knows that he has disappointed or even offended people in the past, and of course, people have disappointed and offended Rinpoche. But by meditating on the source of disappointment and where that disappointment has come from, it gives us the space to accept that disappointment will always happen and we will always end up disappointing people. But what we can do is not be stuck on that disappointment, but to move forward and to think about how it is we don't have to experience disappointment in the future, and what it is we can do in the future to not cause disappointment to others. So that's what Rinpoche did with his experiences, was meditate on how he had possibly disappointed or offended people, and then thought about how he can do things differently next time. And that's why I talked right at the beginning of this sharing, that's why I mentioned, always thinking about what it is Rinpoche would do. Would Rinpoche get stuck and hung up on this feeling of being disappointed, or would Rinpoche get stuck and hung up on disappointing people, or would Rinpoche meditate and think about where the source of that disappointment has arisen from, and how we can, not experience that disappointment in the future, and how we can move past that, and how it is we can adapt our behavior in order not to cause disappointment to others in the future. All right, so what's the best way for doing that? right? So what's the best way of meditating on that and transforming ourselves and adapting and changing our behavior, not to experience disappointment and not to cause disappointment to others? First thing, most important, is generating bodhicitta, right? So generating bodhicitta and learning to act for the benefit of others and not for ourselves. Trying as much as possible to remove ourself and to remove our self-interest from any interaction it is that we have with those around us and with the environment around us. It's not easy, and I'll give you that. It's not easy because we're not trained to abide in bodhicitta, right? We're not trained to act out of bodhicitta. We are trained to act out of selfishness. We are habituated into acting out of selfishness. We are habituated from countless years, countless previous lifetimes of habituation, of acting out of selfishness, not just in previous lives, but in this life, right? So for myself, being in my 30s, it's 30 years of being habituated into acting out of self-interest. For someone who's in their 50s, it's 50 years of habituating into self-interest. So we need to take the first steps into generating bodhicitta. As Rinpoche, like to say, fake it until you make it, right? So whatever it is that we are generating may not necessarily be real bodhicitta for the time being, but it's about planting the seeds, and it's about getting started on the process of generating bodhicitta over and over again until we finally abide in it and acting for the benefit of others and not for ourselves, trying to remove ourselves and our self-interest as much as possible out of any interaction that we have with others and with the environment around us. So doing it over and over again until it's automatic, until it's our new habit, until it's our new normal, right? Will there still be disappointment even after you generated bodhicitta? I wouldn't call it disappointment, but at the same time, I also can't think of another word to particularly capture it very well. But disappointment arising from bodhicitta and disappointment arising from selfishness are very, very different. So if you guys remember, the story about Guan Yin or Chen Rezi, so Guan Yin Pusa, and the sadness that Guan Yin felt, despite having helped countless sentient beings, when Guan Yin looked around and saw the countless more sentient beings that were still suffering, the sadness that was generated and the sadness that was felt as a result of seeing those countless beings, countless suffering, and those people who still need help. That kind of sadness is very, very different from the kind of sadness we feel and the kind of disappointment we feel when our expectations and when our projections are not fulfilled. That kind of sadness that arises from bodhicitta, an example of using Guan Yin or using Chen Rezi as an example, is very, very different from the sadness that we feel when the Christmas gift that we expected didn't turn up, when the birthday gift that we wanted, wasn't given to us. It's a very different type of sadness. How else can you... Good morning, Kamala. Thank you for joining us today. So how else can we manage our disappointment? Generating bodhicitta is one, reframing our disappointment is another, meditating on culpability and responsibility, who is responsible for our disappointment, is another one. Another way is meditating on impermanence. All right, so meditating that first of all, meditating that people are not perfect, we're not perfect, other people are not perfect, but people are not permanent, and people are changing from moment to moment. And so their actions are changeable, their actions are not permanent, and their actions can change. Our actions can change. The disappointment that we cause to other people as a result of our destructive habits over and over again can change as well. And so meditating on impermanence and meditating on the fact that we are not fixed beings and decisions are not fixed things and situations are not fixed and situations can move forward and can change will help us to manage our disappointment, will help us to realize that the disappointment that we feel and the disappointment that we're experiencing is not permanent, it's not fixed, it's not there forever. All right? Sometimes when we're disappointed, and we're disappointed over and over again, we might feel that it's more beneficial for us to stay away from people who disappoint us. And I would say that it's true to an extent in certain circumstances that when you do observe a pattern of destructive behavior and a pattern of destructive habits from somebody else, then with respect, it is good for us, for the time being, to stay away from people who may possibly lead us to being disappointed over and over again, until we learn to manage our own expectations. There are people in our lives, I'm not going to deny the fact that there are people in our lives, despite how much you care for them, even if the care is altruistic, despite how much you care for them, will disappoint you over and over again, because of destructive habits, because of destructive behavior. But what I want to say is that, first of all, remember that the fact that we are disappointed arises from our expectations of them. And so we also need to learn how to manage expectations of them. So it's not necessarily their responsibility. It's not necessarily their fault, right? I also want to say that, staying away from them doesn't mean cancelling them out forever. I don't know if you guys have heard this, you don't know if you guys have heard this phrase recently, this very popular phrase called cancel culture. Staying away from someone who has exhibited a destructive pattern of a pattern of destructive habits or a pattern of destructive behaviors doesn't mean cancelling them forever, but it means staying away from them to give them space, to give them time to change. If staying away from them benefits them because you don't enable their behavior, you don't give them a target to continue to reinforce their bad habits, I would say don't stay away from them forever. Why? Number one, staying away from somebody forever, because they have disappointed you over and over again, number one, denies their ability to change, right? So it denies the fact that their destructive behavior, destructive pattern can be transformed, can be changed, can be no longer there, it can be reversed, can be rectified. When you stay away from someone, what you're saying is, I don't believe in you anymore, and I don't believe that you can change. So for me, staying away from someone permanently is not the answer, because it's saying, I don't believe in you anymore and I don't believe in your ability to change. Similarly, staying away from someone permanently is also, for me, saying that I don't believe in my own ability to manage my own expectations and to manage my own projections. All right, so staying away from somebody means that you believe that they can't change for now. All right, and that maybe you can't help them for now, but it doesn't mean that you can't help them forever. And that's something that Rinpoche always had in mind. So Rinpoche, had many students, many friends, many acquaintances, and so on. And like I said, Rinpoche was generous, Rinpoche was helpful, Rinpoche always sought to benefit others. Was Rinpoche disappointed? Yes. Was Rinpoche betrayed? Yes. Was Rinpoche criticized, attacked? Did people abuse Rinpoche? Yes, they did, right? And so Rinpoche made the very tough decision sometimes to not be in contact with certain people. Was it a very difficult decision to make? Yes, it was a very difficult decision to make. Did Rinpoche intend to do it forever? No, Rinpoche never intended to do it forever. Rinpoche always made decisions for the benefit of other people. Always made decisions for the benefit of other people. Whether or not those decisions matched our expectations on what a teacher should do or how a teacher should behave, that's us, right? That's our expectation. But Rinpoche always acted to benefit somebody else, whether it was staying away from them temporarily so that they don't have an opportunity to keep reinforcing their destructive habits, or staying away from them, or, it was always to benefit somebody else. And so Rinpoche never cancelled anyone permanently. It was always making decisions to benefit someone else, because Rinpoche fully believed and fully understood that everything around us is impermanent and everyone has an opportunity to change if they put in the effort and if they apply the antidote, if they actually do and engage in things that help them to reverse and to transform their destructive behaviors, their destructive patterns, their destructive habits. When you say somebody can't change, and when you say that somebody is fixed and they are the way that they are and that's it forever, you're doing two things. All right? What you're saying when you're adamant about someone's inability to change is that you're also saying that you're saying that you don't have an ability to change, right? Because we, you, I, me, all of us also have destructive habits. We have habits that cause harm and cause damage and cause hurt and cause suffering to other people. So when you say somebody else can't change and you're being adamant about it, that's saying that you yourself can't change, because you yourself do have destructive habits, do have destructive patterns. So when you say somebody else can't change, are you saying that you also can't change? And when you're saying that somebody else can't change and you're adamant about that, what you're also failing to recognize is that you are no different from them. How is somebody else different from you? Are you perfect? Am I perfect? Are we perfect? And if that person has done something that's imperfect and disappointed us, and we're saying that's it forever, I'm never going to talk to you ever again because you disappointed me one too many times, and you will never ever change. How are they different from you? You also do things, I also do things that disappoint people over and over again. So when I say that, I don't want to be around people who disappoint me, and I'm going to not be around them forever, how am I different from them? They did imperfect things, I do imperfect things, right? So being fixated and being adamant about someone not changing is also saying that you yourself can't change, because number one, you and I have destructive habits, and number two, we are no different from the people who have disappointed us, because we are just as imperfect and just as ignorant as they are. How else can you manage your disappointments is also by meditating on what His Eminence Khenso Rinpoche Jampa Yeshe said, which is that do not be surprised when things in samsara go wrong or go badly. Be surprised when things go well, right? What that means is that it's our nature. It's the nature of our existence to suffer. It's our karma to suffer. Our existence is suffering. If you watch Pastor David's talk, you watch Pastor Niro's talks, Easy Dharma for the New Normal, when they talked about the Four Noble Truths and so on, they would have mentioned, and Pastor David now talking about the Wheel of Sharp Weapons, they would have talked about the fact that our existence is suffering. We are born to suffer. And so when you are disappointed and when you suffer unhappiness, why are you surprised? Why are you upset? Why be hung up on it when we are primed, karmically speaking, to be disappointed in our lifetime? So meditating on that fact will allow us not to get hung up on disappointment. You can experience the disappointment, but experience it, observe it, and then let it go. Don't get stuck on it. Don't dwell on it. Don't get hung up on it, right? Which is also what JP has talked about in his mindful morning meditation sessions. So meditate. Why did I find myself in this situation? What is the cause of my having this experience? What could I have done in the past to experience this disappointment now? What am I doing now to create causes to experience further disappointment in the future? Meditate on that. Meditate on where your disappointment arises from. Did I have expectations? Were my expectations verbalized? Did I tell and convey my expectations onto the other party? Were my expectations realistic? Were my expectations unfair? How can I interact with others in the future without expectations? Do those other people have expectations? Do they have expectations of me? And how can I manage those expectations? What is my motivation for managing those expectations? Is it really important for me to do so, and will it help them? Meditate on this, and meditate on Rinpoche's quote. The quote that I read out to you guys earlier, which I will post in the comment section below so that you'll find it easier to refer to. Meditate on the fact that material things don't bring happiness. But perhaps using material things for spiritual reasons, for spiritual endeavors will help to will help to develop, will help to give us deeper meaning and lasting results. And what does that mean? Rinpoche isn't advocating for us to give up everything that we have and for all of us to be paupers. All right? Rinpoche is advocating for us to look at what we have in front of us and look at it as tools to become enlightened. Look at our material possessions, our material assets, our objects around us, our relationships around us as tools to help us to become enlightened. And it's a very, very tantra approach, very, very tantric approach to what we have around us, because now we can look at our human body as a tool. All right? Our human body, which disappoints us all the time because it's not fast enough, it's not healthy enough, it's not fit enough, it's not beautiful enough. We get pimples, we get wrinkles, we get stretch marks, and so on. Our human body, which disappoints us all the time, instead of being disappointed by it, meditate on the fact that it as an object, it as a material object, can be used as a tool to help us to develop qualities, to help us to develop situations and things that will help us to achieve lasting happiness. We can look at our car, which is a material object, as a tool to help us to further our spiritual endeavors. We can look at our car, which is breaking down, which needs to be serviced, which needs to be financed, which isn't as slow, which isn't as shiny, which has scratches, which is dirty, and so on and so on. Instead of being disappointed by all of that, we can look at our car as a tool to help us to become enlightened by bringing us to Dharma teachings, by bringing us to charity events, by bringing us to volunteer at places, by bringing us to a place where we can do retreats, like Kechara Forest Retreat, like going to Kechara House to attend pujas. We can look at our car, which disappoints us constantly, as a tool for our spiritual endeavors. We can look at our homes as a tool. Instead of being disappointed by the mortgage and so on, we can look at our laptops as a tool. It may not be the shiniest laptop, may not be the fastest laptop, our phone may not be the newest phone, may not be the most changgeh phone, but we can look at all of these things as a tool to help us to further our spiritual practice, to help us to further our spiritual endeavors, instead of being disappointed that it's not the latest, the greatest, the fastest. All right, so meditating on Rinpoche's quote, that material things do not bring us lasting happiness, but perhaps if we use it for spiritual endeavors, it will bring us different result and a different outcome. Meditating on that is about adjusting our attitude and adjusting our approach to what we have around us, whether it's our assets or whether it's our relationships with other people. All right, so realize that what you have is not an end. It's not an end. You didn't take rebirth in this life to acquire or accumulate as many properties as possible. You didn't take rebirth in this life to make sure that your children go to school and finish university. That is not your end goal in this life. You didn't take rebirth to do that. Those, getting a car, getting a house, and so on, and all of those things, they are not an end. They are a means to an end. Okay? So meditate on the fact that those are not your end goals in life. You didn't take rebirth to do that. The fact that you are here an hour into a Sunday Dharma sharing, when you could be out enjoying the new relaxed movement control order, the revised movement control order, the fact that you're here on a Sunday listening to this is a very good indication that you didn't take rebirth in this life just to accumulate. You took rebirth in this life to do something else. All right, so meditate on Rinpoche's quote to help every day, to help you to adjust your attitude, to help you to adjust your approach to what it is that you have in front of you, to what it is that you own, and to see it as a tool to develop, to transform, and to further and to progress your spiritual practice. I am going to wind up here because I've pretty much covered everything that I wanted to talk about this week. Just looking to see if anyone has any questions. Sometimes I can't tell if you guys don't have questions because you don't understand what I'm talking about, because I talk too fast or it's disorganized or whatever, or maybe I don't know, you don't have questions because I answered it inadvertently. I don't know, but All right, I'm going to end for this week. I don't see any questions on the feed, but if you do have any questions after the talk, please feel free to send me a message privately, or you can leave me a comment at the bottom of this feed. And before I go, as usual, I want to encourage you guys to reflect on the past week. Reflect on the moments when you were disappointed, and reflect on the lead up to that disappointment. What happened in the 5, 10, 15 minutes or whatever before you actually experienced the disappointment. Meditate on where the disappointment arose from, what caused the disappointment, whether the cause of the disappointment was yourself, whether you could have done anything about it, and whether you could have changed anything about your situation. Thank you, Jacinta. Been making an effort, to talk a little slower. So I'm glad I didn't disappoint this week. But yes, what I want to say is I want you guys to take a moment today to reflect on the times when you have been disappointed in the past week. And if by chance you weren't disappointed in the past week, then think about times when you have been disappointed in your life in the past, and where those disappointments came from, how those disappointments arose, and even how you could have managed those disappointments better. And also meditate on how you may have possibly disappointed others in the past, and combine it with a talk I gave in previous weeks about guilt, right? If you feel guilty for having disappointed somebody in the past, what can you do now to make amends? What can you do now to apologize sincerely, covering, and your apology, to be sincere, should cover the points that I mentioned in that talk. Think about that, how you've been disappointed in the past, and who you've disappointed in the past, and what you can do to make amends. And then, now that we're moving into a new week, think about maybe expectations that you may be having for people this week, certain expectations that you may be having for interactions that are planned for this week. Maybe you've got a big meeting coming up. Maybe your children has a test coming up, and so on. Maybe you are planning to buy something new. Think about the expectations that you have for this week, and what you can do to manage those expectations, and what you can do to guard against those disappointments without losing your sense of care. You should care about going into a meeting and accomplishing your goals and accomplishing your aims. You should care about going into a meeting and being well prepared for it. You should care for helping your child, supporting your child to do well in their exams and all of that. But combining that care with not being attached to a projected outcome. Care, but without attachment. All right. So think about all the times where you may potentially have expectations in this coming week, and how you can manage those expectations and those disappointments. All right. So yes, set a good intention for yourself for this week. Upcoming programs, as usual, for this week. On Tuesday at 8 p.m. we have Rinpoche's Swift Return Puja being conducted in Kechara House by Pastor Hani or Pastor Gimli. And then on Tuesday at 9:30 p.m. we have Easy Dharma for the New Normal being conducted by Pastor David and Pastor Nirul. And then today we have the Doji Shukden Sadhana on the Chinese Kechara Facebook fan page at 2 p.m. And then we have the live chat with Pastor Albert at 3 p.m. All right. So thank you so much for joining me today. If you have any questions, as I mentioned, please feel free to leave me a comment after this stream is over, or please feel free to send me a message, and I will do my best to reply to you as soon as I can. And if you have any requests for pujas or for prayers or for offerings to be made, please also let me know, and I'll be more than happy to fulfill them for you. And don't forget to do your dedications wherever you are, for taking the time out this week, 1 hour and 10 minutes to listen to my sharing. So please don't forget to do your dedications. And I hope you guys all have a good Sunday and a good week ahead. And I will do my dedications from here. Take care, everyone, and I'll see you next week. Same time, same place, for week 6 of these talks and sharings. Bye, guys.